All right. Good morning once again.
Good morning, sir.
You're all welcome. So I was asking before if we have all done the assignments. I believe every one of us must have designed the form we want to style this morning. Okay, so just bear it in mind. I may ask for it in the middle of the class, but let me quickly start styling the form. So what we are actually focusing on this morning is HTML form styling. HTML form styling with CSS. HTML form styling with CSS. So in our last class, we took our time to design the form contents with just HTML as a markup language. And this morning, our focus is on how to make the form presentable to the users, and at the same time, how to make it users friendly. I told us the other time that if you look at the form on the screen, this is not actually presentable. So we need to fine tune the form. We need to make it look more professional. And for us to achieve that, we need to bring in CSS. But anytime you are styling your HTML structure, you are expected to understand the identifiers of each of the elements in that structure. So what do I mean by identifying the identifiers? So the identifiers in this case are could be the way you have structured the HTML element to be selected in CSS. Now, if you look at what we have been doing since, so this is the HTML file structure. This is the form structure which we design in HTML. So I am saying that anytime you want to style any HTML code, which I refer to as the structure, you are expected to understand the identifier. For example, there are three ways we can actually identify HTML elements in CSS, which also translates to three ways of selecting HTML elements in CSS. So in a layman description, what it means is that while you are in CSS form file, how do you reference the elements you are styling in your HTML? So that is the meaning of understanding the element identifiers. There are three ways we can actually select or identify HTML elements while in CSS file. Number one is by their tag name. And that is why you notice like this form, if I want to talk to this form, I will simply call form in CSS, which means that I identify that element by its tag name called form. Now, if I add a class, if I add class, and I say what? Form 001. So in other words, I have changed the form identifier to a class from tag name to what? A class identifier. And remember what we have been explaining since, anytime you are selecting a class element in your CSS, you are to start with the dots, which is called the period in programming, then follow by the class name. So these are some of the things we have been, relating with all this while. So I want us to study this form structure so that we identify what? The identifiers. Like form is not a class element. So for me to speak to this form, which is the main container, I am going to simply type form and then I will declare the properties, the CSS properties. Now, I'm looking at the structure. So I have already known how I'm going to call the form. That is, I'm going to call the form by its tag name because it is not a class element. Then I move to the next one, which is the field set. The field set is also going to be called with its class name. It is not a class element, neither an ID element. The legend, the same thing. Then the div that are used to convert inline element to block element are also going to be called by their tag name. Then the levers which describe my form input in order to guide the users on what to input inside the boxes. They are not class elements, so I'm going to call them by their names. The input, that is where we are going to be a little bit logical now. The input, we are going to be referencing them by their type. In other words, we are going to group them while styling them by their type attributes. Remember, the type attribute describes the kind of data you expect to collect from the user. So for you to say this input, don't forget, by now you should already know that anytime we mention the word input, we are referring to that text box that the users are meant to enter their details. So when we say input type text, we are indirectly saying or directly saying that what the user is expected to enter in that box should be text, not number. So now, but if you look at all our input, we created different input with the expectation of collecting different data from the users, those that are going to fill the form. Now, for example, there are input we created and we describe the type to be text. For collecting their first name, we say the type should be text. For collecting their middle name, we also said the type should be text. Then this is another place where you use input, but the type is different. This is another place where you use input, but the type is different. So you can see that we can actually select this input by their type attribute, such that I can speak to those input with the type text differently. I can also speak to those input with the type date differently. I can as well speak to those input with the type attribute radio differently. So that is how we are going to classify them. Because if we just call input, it means we are calling them by their tag name, and that means that you are talking to all of them. And I may not want the length of this input to be the same as the length of what? The date input. Because the date input is not meant for the users to enter any information. Instead, they are to select from the dates or the calendar picker which this particular type must have produced. So I just want us to know that anytime you want to style a complex structure like this, you don't just rush to the CSS. You take your time to understand the element identifier. How are you going to relate to this element from CSS? Remember that we are working with external CSS, which means that the HTML file and the CSS file are separated. And don't forget that we have already established the connection. They are linked. So now we are going to start from form. So I'm going to start by styling the form. After that, I'll move to the field set. If there is anything that I need to enhance there. After that, I move to legend. After that, probably I look at what the input, and then before looking at what the div. So depending on how the form is transforming as I'm styling, that will determine the order. But the standard way of doing this, you can follow the hierarchy, the order of declaring them. Remember, you started by declaring the form, and then followed by the what? The field set, followed by the legend, and then you can follow that order. But there is no principle that says that you must follow that order. I can start by styling my input. That is still all right. Okay, now in our last class, we have already created a CSS file for styling all our form input. So I will just, and we have already connected it, but in your own case, if you have not established this file, make sure you create it and also what? Link it up with the HTML file. Now here we only style our span, which happen to be that asterisk icon that inform the users that an input is mandatory or is compulsory to be filled or not. So learn to use comment to explain each element you are styling. So like I said, I'm starting with the form. So I'll simply say what? Styling. I'll simply say styling the form elements. So anytime you want to style an element, it is professionally, you check the front end and look at the current appearance. It is not everything you design that requires styling. It requires styling once you find out that it is not presentable. That is when you style. So if you discover that what you have by default from HTML is good to go, it's not compulsory, you must style it. So I'm looking at this form now. Number one, the form width is too much. You can see we have this extra space. So I'm going to reduce this form. The form is currently displaying 100% because it is a block element. Don't forget, I told us before now, the block elements, almost all the elements in HTML, once they are declared, by default, they are set to display 100%, which means what? The full width of the browser. So that is what we are having here. Looking at the field set, the grouping line, that tells you that what? The form is what? 100% width. So what I want to do is to reduce it to 50% and then probably what? Centralize it, because I'm going to have an attractive or illustrative background of my services as the background of the form. So in other words, while they are filling the form, I want them to be, seeing or viewing some activities at the background of the form that inform them on my services or what I do. So it's a double target. So for that reason, I will reduce the form. It's my choice. Your own choice might be that you want to reduce the form to 50% so that you can have another image placed by each side. That is, as they are filling the form, there is another image you are using to probably send or pass another message to them. So that is the first thing I'm going to do, is to reduce the width of the form to the half of the current word length. So to achieve that, I'll simply call form because I've already identified how I'm going to select the form. It's not a class element. I am selecting it by its name. So I will simply say width. Width, instead of saying 100%, I will say what? 50%. and then I'll go back to the front end and check. So you can see that with this, I have already reduced the width of the form. I've achieved that. Now, the next thing I want to do, like I told us, I want to put the form at the center of the browser, horizontally. Now, to do that, the form is a block element. At the same time, is a container. So, which means that since it's a block element, I could just use margin, and then I'll simply say what? Auto. Because if I use floats, there is a better CSS property for floating or for moving element from the left to the right. But unfortunately, the form or most elements or this property called float does not have center property. You cannot say, for example, I can say float, and then it only has only two values, either right or what? Left. Or you calculate it. That is if you have time to start calculating. So if I say float to the right now, and I go back to the front end, you see that what? You have automatically floated the form from the left to the right. So if I go back and say what? Left. So by default, all HTML elements are displayed by the left-hand side. That is why once you create any element, it will always be placed by the left-hand side. So, but what I actually wanted is to place it at the center. But like I said, there is no float center. So the idea or the techniques we are going to use right now, since the float property does not have center value, I will use a concept called margin. I told us before that the concept of margin is seeing an element as a box model, which means that what? The element is wrapped in a box. And if that element is wrapped in a box, it means that what? There are two spaces that are involved within that element. The space on the outside, which is the margin, and the space on the inside, which is the padding. So if we are using this concept and I say auto, that will automatically what? Centralize the form. That is a concept. You can calculate the space you have here and here. They are equal, which shows that what? The form is currently what? At the center of the browser. Now, if I want to move it down, I want to shift it down. Probably I feel that it's too closer to this margin here. I want to what? Move it down. So what you are going to do is to talk to only the top margin. So I will now come here and say what? Margin top, because I want to push it from the top. So with what distance you want to push it from the top? I could say, okay, I want to push the form from the top by, let's say, 30 ps as pixel, and then I'll go to the front end and check if anything happened. So you can see that what? It moves. So I can keep pushing it until it gets to the right location I want it to be. So we are still styling the form. So the next thing I want to do on the form, like I said, if I want to give the form a separate background, then I'm also going to say what? The background. Background what? Color. And then I will just choose the color I want. So I can choose any color first if, for example, the color I am looking for is not accessible. So what I will do is to first of all what? Pick a color and then hover on that color icon to give me what? The color bucket. That this is actually the background I want. So I'll just pick here. So this is called RGB method of coloring your object, where the R stands for red, while the G stands for green, and the B stands for blue. And they all have numerical representation. So what we are having here is what? The red is having a value of 214, while the green is having the value of what? 169, and then the green. So if I want to maybe reduce it or transparent it, then I will now add what? A to that what? RGB. So that A, once you add that A, it becomes the alpha value. If I add the A here, it becomes what? The alpha. The alpha value is what we use to what? To apply what we call opacity. Opacity is just like transparenting it. You are reducing the color so that it doesn't give you the full color. For example, now, just to explain this, if I remove here now and put what 255, which should be the highest value, that is, it means that what you need a full red. Why is the red not full? Because other percentage of the colors are there. So if I turn this to 0 and I also turn this to 0, then it's going to give us what? Full red. So then you now have what? The full red. So if I go back to the front end, you see that what? The form is now what? Having a red background color. And this red is 100% red. But if I want to reduce this red, but it's still going to be in the family of red, then that is where the alpha value, because as it stands now, we have not supplied the alpha value. So the alpha value is always in decimal units. So I will just put a comma here. I will just say what? Alpha value should be what? 0.3. Now, the moment I type 0.3, look at the red it produced now. And it has reduced the red. So this is one logic we can use to calculate color that we don't know their names. Because it is not every time as a developer you call color by their name, red, blue. Whatever, if the color you want to use, you don't have the knowledge of the exact name of that color, it becomes challenging. So that is why we use the ROGBA method. We still have another one, which I'm going to use as we proceed, which is called hexadecimal, where you combine number and alphabet starting with hash, and then that is another way you can also calculate color in CSS. But if you know the color, you just simply what? Type. If you know the color you are working with, you will just simply type the name of the color. In this case, if I know the color, I will just say what? Let's say green. Let's say green. And then if I go back to the front end, I have it there. Okay, so, but like I said, my concept, what I want to do is that this form will not have a background color. The form will only have, the form will use the background color of the entire page. So we are going to download an image of maybe an actionable image that represents your service, and then probably we will take it to Photoshop and reduce its brightness so that they can be seen through that image. Then the form will be on top of it. So that is what I actually want to achieve. So let me quickly do that before we continue. So what I'm going to do is to comment this off for now because we don't need it. Okay, now let me open my Photoshop. So that is why as a web developer, you need to have knowledge of at least one graphics application, either Photoshop or Corel, because at times we blend some of these things together in order to come up with something unique. But where you don't have this, then you have to use an image and then give the image opacity. So while I am waiting for Photoshop to open, I'll first of all show us that option. In case you don't have knowledge of Photoshop and you still want to use an image and reduce the brightness, let me quickly show us how to do that while Photoshop is still opening. So I will just go to a browser and look for a very good picture that can represent my service. So let's say we are into training. So I will just say computer, or let's say what? Students working, or students working with the computer. or laptop. I just need picture of students. Then I will now go to image section. Good. So I need one of these. So let's say I want to use this as a background. So I will right click on it, look for a very smart one. You can see this one is a kind of blur. So any picture you are using in your website, make sure that is a very clear picture. So I'll say let's save as. So I'll be targeting that folder. It's coming up. So I think it's web. This is it. Then go in here. We will have some fine backgrounds. If I forgot to know anyway. So I'll just say students BG. So this same picture, I'm going to take it to Photoshop and work on it. But before that, let's quickly call it here. So if I'm to call it here, so call it here. So if I'm to call that picture here, I'm going to say what? Background image. Background image. And then because it's an external object, like we have already learned, we'll add URL to it. And then you say, add URL to it, then slash, and target the folder. Remember, it was saved as student BG. Then, of course, if we go to the front end, you discover that this is what we have. So we are writing it inside the form. Ordinarily, we shouldn't have written it inside the form. It should come inside the body because I want to cover the entire page background. So I will call body tag and then declare my CSS coiling bracket. Then I paste it here. So this is where it should be. If I go back now, that will be an image for the entire background. But remember, when the image is duplicated like this, I have already taught us how to rectify an issue like this. What is happening is that what the image size is smaller than the page. So what the browser did on its own is to, okay, this person wants the image to fill the entire page. Okay, let me duplicate it in order to ensure that happens. So you can order the browser not to do that by saying what? Background repeats. Then you tell the browser that what? Don't repeat. So if I go back now, it will now become what? 1. So let me check if there's any error. Background repeats. Sorry, we say repeat instead of what? No repeat. So we are supposed to use no repeat. So let's go back and check. So we have it just 1. But there's another challenge, part of what we have done. How do I stretch this image to cover the entire page? Then we add another property, which is called background size. Because we're having issue with the sizing. Then I will say cover the entire page. So if I go back there, you see that what the image is covering now. Now, I was saying something the other time, what we call opacity. Opacity is what I actually want to go to Photoshop to easily achieve. Because I discovered that if I try adding the opacity here, it might end up reflecting on other objects and making them look, in a different way, which can be a style. But just to have it perfectly, we will now go to Photoshop. So I will just say what? Opacity. Opacity means to transparent. So I will start with decimal point. I will say what? Let's say 0.3. So if I go back there now, you see what happened? So it's now transparenting on the form, which is dimming my form elements or properties. So this is exactly what I want to avoid that is making me to go to Photoshop. So now for you to avoid this, this is what you are going to do. So let me what? comment this whole section out for now. Now our Photoshop has opened. So even if you have not learned Photoshop, if you are smart as I'm doing it, you can quickly install Photoshop and start doing minor things like that. So I will just go to my home page and just go to create new, in order to set my canvas, because I want it to flow with the website page. And the website page standard is in pixel. So what I'm going to do is to change this from inches to pixel, so that it will be read as an image. Now, but the size of my website is the best resolution is 1024. That's the standard by 9. I can say by 900 or by 769. So this is the best resolution for laptop. Then what I'm going to do, once I'm done with this, I click on create. So I have this. Now that particular picture, I will just go to my file and select place embedded, because I want to superimpose it on that background. So I go back to my desktop, locate the folder where you store that particular picture, then come here, then go to image, and then I believe this is the picture. So I click. So it's coming, it's loading the picture. Now this is the picture. So I will just increase it to fill the entire space, increase it to fill the entire space. Now it look blur. Once I click on this to commit it, then the image will be a little bit better. So what I actually want to do is to reduce it. So to reduce it, what I'm going to do is to create a square or a rectangle and cover the whole of this, just to dim it. That's what we're trying to do with the opacity that was affecting the form content. So what I'm going to do here now is to simply click on this function here. So once I click here, I'll see blending option. So once this option comes up with a dialog box, you drag this opacity. You can see this is opacity that we're adding there. You reduce it. As you are reducing, I want to be looking at the image. You can see that you are seeing the image faintly. So let it get to a point. This is how I want it to display on the page. So while they are filling the form, they should be seeing this picture like this at the background. So once I am done like this, I will export this as an image so that I can call it as my image background. So you go to File, select Export, then select Export As. So from here, you will now select JPEG, switch from PNG to JPEG. Then work with the same size. Make sure that the width is reading what you imputed. Then click on this. Then target where you want it to be stored. So I want to target it to that same our folder. Then inside the image. Then I will name it BG, let's say 3. Then that is done. Now you move back to your website. You leave Photoshop, go back to your website. Then what I'm going to do here, let me bring back the whole of this. Then I'll delete. Okay, I will need the repeat. I don't need this. I will need this. So I have to change the URL. I have to call the image we just created now. So slash, go to image, select BG3. So if I go back to the front end, you see what I have. Cool. Very cool. And it's fitted because we use that 1024 by 7, which is the standard resolution. So let me check how it's going to appear on a mobile phone. Inspect. I want to see the part of this picture I'm going to see within the form. So you can see it. Good. It's responsive. So now let's continue. So the next thing I want to style is the label. I want to style the label because as it is now, we are not seeing the letters. Okay, let me start with the field set. Remember that the field set is what generated this particular line. That is the field set. And then after that, we go to what? The contact. So if I go back to my HTML file, just to understand the identifier, it's not a class name, so class element rather. So I will just come here and say what? Styling the field sets elements. Styling the field sets element. So from here, I'll just call it field sets. What exactly do I want there? That line that you are saying, if I don't want it, I will just say what? Border. And then I'll say what? None. So let's go back there and see whether we have succeeded removing it. Yes, we have removed it because I don't want that line to be there. Because that line is a kind of binding or maybe creating a boundary. I want the form to be very simple on the background I have designed. Just a minute, please. Okay, so I've succeeded removing the line. So the next thing I want to talk to now is the legend that produced that contact form description. I'll come back here and check. My legend is not a class element. So I'll just come here. I'll do the same here. Styling the form description. Legend. So it's not a class element. So I'll call it by its name, legend. Then declare my bracket. So the next thing I'm going to do is to say, I want to move it to the center. Look at the front. I always check what you have. I want this to be at the middle here because all this will be stretched later. So I'll say what? Tests align the center. So let's check whether we have achieved that. Perfect. Then I want it to be title case. I want to increase the size. So I'll come here. I'll say what? Font size. I want to make it 20 ps. The color will be white. Color will be white because based on that, our background, we want to make it visible. If I go back there, so you're working, you are checking. You are checking. Once you get to the point whereby everything is presentable to your client, then you stop. Now, the next thing is that maybe I want it to be slanted. If I don't want that, well, just trying to use it to still remind us of these CSS properties. Most of these we have already used them before. So that is what? Font, style, and then I'll say what? Italic. So if I go back and check now, you see it. If this is better, fine. Now, the next thing I want to talk to are the labels. The labels. I want to talk to the labels. What are the labels? You know what you created with the labels. This is a label inside the input. If I call div, I will end up talking to all the label. Okay? If I call this div and I say color red, all the items inside them will automatically what? Use that property because at that moment, they don't have their own individual styling. A practical example is just like your children. Until they have their own, they build their own houses, they will bear the parent house. But the moment they have their own, then they may not have, a claim on that. So right now, when you call the parent as a parent red, all the children inside it will inherit that red at that moment until you start calling the children one after the other and start defining their style. So to avoid that, that is why I don't want to call div. So I want to specifically go to label. So that, because if I call div now, it will affect it, to affect the input. So I'll go back to my CSS. Label is not a class element. So I will say what? Styling all the labels. Styling all the labels. Okay. So I will say label, label. I will say display block, because is look at what happened. Immediately you say display block. You see what happened now? Everything, I just want to take note of what happened. Before the display block, the label was placed beside them. That's what, in line with the input. But the moment I say display block, that I mean what? You are saying that what? Each of you should take different line. Label be on your own line. Input be on your own line. Now, if I remove this now, if I comment this out temporarily and I come back here, that means what? You have fall back to what? Inline. Is a choice depending on how you feel that this will be best presented to your users. So I would prefer what? I want to prefer this for now. Once you know at which point something is reflecting, you can always go back where you are true and turn it off. So if I come back here now, I have it like this, which is a little bit more professional. But let's go on first. Okay. Now we are still styling the label. I'll say margin because I want some space. Margin is the space outside. Now that you are placing them block, I want reasonable space between the inputs and the label. I don't want them to mesh like this. I want space. And that space should be at the bottom, not at the top. So I will say what? Margin bottom. So margin bottom, I just need a space of 10 ps. So let's check now. You see, reasonable space here, space here, space here, space here. So that there will not be two parts. It's your choice. So we are still on label. The next one, I will say font size. Font size. My font size, I will just make them what? 16 ps. Okay, 16 ps, let's check. They are a bit what? Better now. Because sometimes when you are sizing your font, always consider mobile first, not laptop. Because research have shown that 90% of website users uses phone and other smaller devices. So those designed because everything is appearing well on the laptop. After all, only 10% will use laptop to access the website. Okay. So now I need to add color. I need to add color. The color should go with the other color. You have to be consistent when you are using color. Don't use color that are rioting or color that are fighting themselves. Maintain certain what? Color. And if you are building the website for a customer, you know their favorite color. So work with those colors. So you can see that all these other ones were not created with labels. So I'm going to style them differently because they have to also be in that when we get to input, those ones were created with input. So the next thing I want to quickly look at right now is the inputs. I want to style the inputs. What do I mean by the inputs? If I go back to my HTML structure, these inputs, these are the inputs, those boxes. That is what I want to talk to now. Like I started by telling us that these inputs, we use the same tag called input, but we are expecting different data from the users with this same tag. Here, at this point here, you are expecting the user to write his first name in form of text. The same thing in form of text, but here the user should submit or should write you not text as date, but the same input, but with different what? Type attribute. So I'm going to start by selecting the input. So I'm going to start by selecting the input where type is equals to text. So which means that if I call width for those inputs, it will only affect this one because the type is text. It will affect this one because the type is text. It will never affect this one. So the same input but different type. So only the input I specify type to be text. They are the only ones I want to stock to first. So how do I select that in my CSS? So I will just use comment also. Styling, input, width, type, attributes equals to text. So those are the only one I want to pick out from the form and design them differently. So how do you select it? You say input. Then you use a square bracket. This square bracket means what? We are picking from group of them. Then you now say what? Once you have typed this, you now put type inside. Type equals to. Then you say text. Then before you declare your CSS bracket, then I will now say their width. Their width, only these ones that you are selecting, their width should be 100% inside the entire width of the form. Width. So if I go back to the front end, you see what has happened now. We have stretched this one to take the whole space available in the form. So you can see that what we did now did not affect this one. They were also created with input, but because we said only input where the type attribute is equal to what? Text. All right. Now, the next thing I want to style is that I'm still on that input. I told us of the padding. This object now, between this and this, the space you are seeing here is called margin. Why? Because it's a space outside. Then between this Egwero and the boundary, the space between them, they are called padding. Now, I am considering that this right of, they are too closer to the boundary. I want space there. So let me start with padding. So I will add what? Padding. Now, when you are calling padding, you should know that padding has 4 values. Why did I say so? Now, if you go back to the front end, I can add padding from here. That's what, between this E and this vertical line is called left padding. Then there is another one here, between this O and what this, that's right padding. Between this E and the top, that's top padding, bottom padding. So we have 4 values for both margin and padding whenever you are working with them. Now, as an expert, how do you talk to all of them at once? The first side. If you supply one value, let's say 10 PS, you are saying that what the top should be 10, the left should be 10, the right should be 10, and the bottom should also be 10. That is what you are indirectly saying. So as I come here, you see how the form input has space now, and which is better. So if I'm writing inside this input now, my write-up are no longer what? Touching or very close to the what? To the boundary. Now, I'm not going to talk about the margin again because this the display block, we have already added the margin space. So we have space between the write-up. So we don't need to work on that. So if I don't want to achieve this with this, I can as well use what? I can say, okay, the height. If I call something like this height, I say, for example, 30 PS. For example, 30 PS. So if I go back to my front end, you see what happened. It increases it. So it's either I achieve it with padding or I achieve it what? With height. So anyone that is better. So I want to stay on. Let me turn off this and see the impact of the height only. Good. So you can see this is the height. So the height is still reasonable because adding the height and the padding, that will give you too much space. Either you choose one or you leave the other one. So another thing I want to do is that I want a border design, border line. Border line are the lines at the edge. I want a design there. I want to specify a color. So I'm still talking to those ones that we are selecting. I'll say what? Border. border. Remember the syntax for selecting border. I'll start by declaring the width and then the type of color, the type of line. That is what? Smooth line or solid line. And then the color, like I told us, I want to use hexadecimal. Hexadecimal is where you start with hash, shift and 3. And then when you call C, when you call letters or number and letter to form a color, like this now, form this color. Look at the color I have there. It look like that one, the one we have by default. So if I say, okay, hash A1, A1, if I click here now, that is a color. Also, let's check what we have there. That is a color. So I want that color. If I want any other color, I can. If I want black, you just say what? 000. You put 00 to give you black. So this is another way you can calculate what? Color. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is to add border radius. What is border radius? This edge, the edge, I want some curve on the 4 edges. I want some curve there. So what do I do here? I'll simply come here and say what? Border radius. Border radius. Then I'll say, let's say radius of 5 ps. A radius of 5 ps. So I click. So you can see that there's a little bit curve now, which makes it look more presentable. So with this, I have spoken to this set of items. So now I want to select this one, input with date, and probably increase the width no, to 50%. Date and file, I will blend them together. So I can come here and say, selecting styling input equals to date. So I will just come here and say input the same format, select type is equals to date. So I want to select multiple at the same time. So let me go to the front end. I'm selecting this, I'm selecting this. So I'm adding this and what? This. I don't know how come. Okay, this one is select. This one is select, while this one is file. So here is email. Okay, let me just work with those two first. So what I'm going to do is that I will just put a comma here. I will just say input. This is how you select more than one. Then type again. Type equals to file. Then comma, you now say select. Select is the one that created the drop down. Then before you put your calling bracket. Here you are talking to 3 of them at the same time. So I will say their width should be 50% instead of 100% of the available space. So let's confirm if we have any good. So you can see that it affected the select, but the dates is not affected. And this, okay, let's see if I say input type this, then input type this. So let me check now. Okay, so if it's not selecting, oh, sorry, here I put just A. I just want to verify. So date is affected now. Now remaining this file, input type, file, input type, file. Okay, so let me just start this one first. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'll give the same border radius. So there are some properties I'm going to repeat here. So I will just copy them in order to look consistent or unique. And then also, I'm copying this because I want them to look the same. And then I'll also copy what else again. Okay, let me check front end and see. Okay, so I'm copying padding. Let me add the height also. That is to be the same. Either I use height or I use padding. So let's check. Okay, good. So they are unique now. They're unique now. Okay, so it's actually affecting the file. You can see it there. So it's affecting it also. So now the next thing I want to do is, let me talk to the div so that it can give all this other one white color. So let's just say div, I'll just say color white. So any element that's inside div does not have its own specific styling should inherit its parent property. That is what we just did now. So all of them are now what? White in color. So now the next thing we want to do is to probably style the button. The button. So how do we select the button? Remember, we go to our HTML structure, how we created a container and then we nested what? The buttons inside. We have one what? Button, reset. Then we have what? Input. So what I am going to simply do here is to, let's see how we can call this. Let's see how we can call this. So styling the input, styling the buttons. Styling the buttons. So I will say input, select, input select, type is equals to submit. So I don't know which one I use button tag to create the other time. Okay, let's say submit first. Submit. Submit. Then comma. We have button. The other one that we created button. Then I'll add this. I'm selecting both of them at the same time. So I'll say padding. I'll start by adding padding to both of them. So a padding of 10 PS by 20 PS because I need enough space. So let's check what we have there. Good. So you can see it now. You can see it. Then I want to move it down. This is email. I want it to go down. So from here, talk to this element. Okay, let's get the button because the idea is that this button will move to the center. So for us to place them at the center, remember that we wrap them in a container. So it will be easier for us to float now. We wrap them in a container and the class name of that container is button. So button is already, that div is already displaying 100%. So I will say what? Class button. I will just say width. I will reduce it to 50% so that it will not, so I'll be able to move it to the center. Then I will now say margin auto, so that I can move it to the center. So if you come here, you can see we have moved it down. But if it's not positioned the way you want it, you can use the manual margin. So you can say margin left. You can say margin left. You keep pushing it small. So margin left. You can say, okay, move by 40 PS. Then you check. That's 40 PS. In fact, move by, let me use percentage so that we faster. Move by 30%. Okay, so this is actually what we can cover because I have a low battery. I started using the laptop before the time. So if you have questions, you can ask. So in our next meeting, we are still going to perfect this form. We are not done yet. We still have few things to talk about, like if they are writing inside it, the color we want it, or even the space that is currently showing white, we can change the color, probably to blend with this color. So we are still going to touch it. So let me log it through my phone, then you can ask questions.
Please enter the distance. Let me snap, please.